Hello and welcome to the Criminal Justice Show. I'm your host, Skylar Sparrow, and today we'll be discussing the budget cuts and the impacts on the criminal justice system. Illinois in itself is not in a good place financially, so everybody suffers when budget cuts are administered in different areas. Specifically, we will be interviewing 5 members of society to help keep the peace and ensure our safety, starting with Sam, a bar leader in the Illinois court systems. So, Sam, tell us about the recent budget cuts and how they have impacted the department and who they've impacted the most.
So the budget cuts have mainly impacted just the ability for the courts to give justice to people, just mainly reduced in court hours and understaffed and not being able to get to everyone's case in a timely fashion. And so overall across the U.S., the National Center for State Courts conducted a survey, and the results show that, quote, courts in 42 states have reduced their budgets considerably. 39 have suspended filling clerk vacancies in courts, and 34 states have laid off court staff overall. But most significantly, 23 state courts have reduced court operating hours. And with the decrease of the funds for the courts, the public has limited access to justice, and it results in the public having limited belief in the court system actually doing their job and giving them justice for it. And recently a new message from Governor J.B. Pritzker's office warned state agencies in Illinois of future budget cuts and instructed them to include in their budget cuts for the next fiscal year a, quote, a scenario that anticipates a 6.5% across the board cut, end quote. That seems like a small percentage, but to them it's a really big percentage. They don't want a cut at all to happen. But so yeah, and with these reductions, courts have an inability to handle civil cases in a timely fashion, and most civil cases are divorce, child custody, foreclosures, bankruptcy, personal injury, and more. And with job loss, it just creates an overall slowdown in court activities. The criminal justice system already moves pretty slow, but this is just making it even slower and impossible for people to receive justice.
Emma, how have budget cuts impacted our jails and the ones who run them?
Budget cuts have impacted our jails in my line of work because the number of correctional officers has dropped by 20% since the budget cuts in the past years, and it's become more difficult for us to do our job since the number of prisoners has maintained the same or increased.
Okay, in terms of problems, have any arose due to budget cuts specifically?
Yeah, the budget cuts put both our officers and prisoners at risk. For example, since the budget cuts, it's been harder to recognize the signs of bad mental health in our prisoners, leading to more suicides in the prison. Due to lack of budget, not enough prison officers spend time talking to the prisoners and seeking the signs that are stressed. And it's also affecting the medical costs in our facilities.
Okay, well, awesome. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me tonight. We were able to discuss some of these issues that budget cuts have brought up for our jails. As for our next guest, Hannah is a Douglas County sheriff who is here to explain how budget cuts are affecting her in her line of work. So Hannah, tell us, who is impacted the most due to these recent budget cuts?
In Douglas County, the people who are affected the most by these budget cuts are the people in the government departments. So, for example, 10 positions are being cut down because of these budget cuts, because we simply can't afford them anymore. So we're losing 2 sheriffs for each department and 1 analysis along with 7 other positions. So.
Okay, I see how that can really cause a lot of problems for people.
Mm-hmm.
What about problems outside of just position loss have these cuts brought?
We're also losing some programs, so the officers have to go through training programs, and since budgets are being cut, we can't afford to have people who can teach those classes, so we're losing certain training for officers, which is bad because they need that training. So
Yeah. Any evidence of this affecting the U.S. on a much larger scale for other sheriffs?
Well, if other budget cuts are happening around the country, then we're probably losing officers, which means we're losing patrolling, which means more crime, because less patrolling leads to more crime. So with less officers around, there's going to be more violence and illegal activities going on.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and move on to our next guest, a detective from McLean County, Paloma. So, Paloma, who has been hit the hardest in your department by these budget cuts?
Well, the budget cuts has affected us all in the department, actually. A lot of detectives have lost their jobs, and like the remaining detectives who like are able to, the government give them money, we've like actually received the cases that the other detectives have. So it's like a lot of work and a lot of cases for only one person, and it's just a lot of responsibility that we've gotten.
That can put everybody in a tough spot.
Yes.
Other than that, have you noticed any problems occurring as a result of these cuts and only having one detective?
Actually, there has been a lot of problems. There's like less cases being solved, and there's more crime being committed and not justified. So a lot of criminals get away with what they do, and there's a lot of more drug dealings that have been occurring too, and so there's less safety overall, like around society.
Yeah. Does this affect other detectives around Illinois, not just in your department?
I personally think it does affect other detectives in Illinois. Actually, one of my friends, another area, was telling me that they like try to, do their best, but like they're so limited to their resources that it's just not working out.
Yeah, well, it seems like there's a lot of negative feedback coming from these budget cuts. Thank you, Paloma. As for our next guest, it will be Mark, who is a state trooper, who's going to shed some light on the impacts of budget cuts. So, Mark, tell us about who is impacted the heaviest by the recent budget cuts.
So, who's impacted by the recent budget cuts are state troopers all around the United States are losing their jobs due to budget cuts, and that's not right. A lot of the state troopers in my department have lost their jobs. This has put more work on the remaining troopers. The decreased amount of state troopers has made it harder for troopers to effectively patrol highways and interstates.
Okay, so I assume that this has led to other problems as well.
Right.
Would you be able to share some of those issues that have been happening?
Yeah, of course. So what's been happening so far is there are several problems that have occurred because of the budget cuts. There is little to no funds to support training academies for state troopers. Without the funding to support training academies, it is much harder to replenish state troopers. Also, there are not as many state troopers out patrolling, so they can't cover as a large amount of area. But as the budget cuts are made, the job of being a state trooper becomes more dangerous due to lack of an equipment, funds, money to hire troopers. So, yeah, that pretty much basically tells you why and how many cuts we've been having.
Yeah, well, I completely understand that. Do you want to share us with any insight of how that's affected like Illinois or the United States like as a whole?
Okay, so my job in the United States is no longer secured because of the large amount of state troopers being laid off consistently. For example, in Oklahoma City in 2017, the Department of Public Safety and Highway Patrol experienced a 14.5% budget cut. This has automatically resulted in 100 state troopers and police officers losing their jobs. Oklahoma City in 2017 has fewer highway state troopers, 795, than it did in, 795, but did in 1990.
Well, as we can tell, there's a lot of issues that are all brought up by one issue of just budget cuts. So thank you, Mark, for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, thank you. And as we have heard from these 5 individuals that all work in and around the criminal justice system to help keep us safe as well as the surrounding areas, that these budget cuts have really hurt us as a nation, as a whole. Many of these issues and many of the departments have suffered far worse than any of our 5 guests have told us about tonight, and these issues seem to go unsolved. Illinois' budget is in a crisis and needs a lot of work to feel comfortable and to get to a comfortable and safe place. So thank you for tuning in, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.